All right, I've got some great games today. Going to bring up the list. Hasn't actually changed, although there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about, but I want to talk about them at the end, just because some of the folks who have been commenting have brought up a few interesting points. So I'm actually going to bring up the last video, take a look at the comments, try to address them as best as I'm able, and then hopefully as part of the conversation rather than writing, some long memo on the page that'll be lost to history anyway. But I haven't changed the deck list, and so we'll just jump right into it, and hopefully you'll enjoy the games. I think the last one is particularly crazy, but there were a few good ones in here. Now I haven't checked for replay bugs, so hopefully we don't get hit by any of those, but we'll take a look. So first game is against Mad Cow Chicken, running Una, Queen of the Fae, and I've got a hand that's very serviceable. At first blush, I'm thinking I want to go get a Gilded Lotus here and just get a lot of mana. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to hold out for that. All right. Drawing the Cryptic kind of makes the Gilded Lotus plan a little bit better. My opponent has a mental misstep for Sensei's Divining Top, which is a little rough. Runs out of map and then sacks immediately to go get Creeping Tar Pit. So I'm going to at least be able to not get misstepped here. Hopefully they're not also running Daze or Force of Will at this point, or don't have it. All right, I'm good. So I've got the Lotus down. Unfortunately, 1 mana shy from actually playing Cryptic, but still a pretty good spot here. It's hard for blue and black to deal with that. Opponent gets a Tree of Perdition into play. I could Deluge for 13 here and kill it. Or I can take 15 and not kill it. Basically, they're going to deal 15 to me. But if I don't kill it, then I get to save Toxic Deluge. And they said that's the route I want to take. So I go ahead and run out a bunch of mana, get a Throne of the High City into my hand, play a Breya, and pass. Opponent now has a 27 toughness creature, and I'm at 13. V clicks away my Vandal Blast and plays a Cursed Totem, so Breya can no longer activate. I go ahead and just play and use the Throne of the High City, thanks to having found a Force of Will off my opponent's Vendilion click, so it actually in some way improved my hand. Opponent tries to draw 3 cards. I'm going to take it out with Force of Will there. And top deck a Mind Twist, which is really nice. So it allows me to actually Cryptic the... I forgot to mention, of course, my opponent played Telepathy, which it gives perfect information, but at the price of being a card that you've lost for the rest of the game. So I go ahead and just Cryptic Curse Totem back to their hand, and then Mind Twist the opponent's hand away. Now I have an active Breya. And this is very important because I'm going to pause. This is very important because this is the turn where my opponent's Creeping Tar Pit could have attacked me and given my opponent the Monarch. And of course I could have taken it back by attacking back. But first of all, taking 3 damage per turn at 12 is gnarly. Secondly, they get a card off of that. So I did want Breya to be active here. Now my opponent, for their turn, gets to draw Concentrate into a Soul Ring, into a Thoughtseize, taking the Deluge that I tried to save earlier. Rough stuff. All right, so for my turn, I top deck an Impulse, so I go ahead and Impulse into Treachery. Of course, my opponent knows what I have, so it's not a Treachery secret. I'm going to go ahead and attack for 1 here. Since Breya is active, my opponent wants to use their turn to kill Thopter, and then I just sack and kill the V-Click anyway. That's fine. Instead, they activate Creeping Tar Pit after Imperial Sealing successfully and then push. So I'm going to go ahead and get the Tar Pit off the board using Breya so I can keep a Thopter for a V-Click next turn in case I don't want to do anything about it. I'm going to thin my deck a little bit because I have the Marsh Flats, so if I do draw a Brainstorm, I still have a fetch land, or a Brainstorm effect. And then follow up with a Breya. Looks like we're going to bug out. I Treachery'd my opponent's V-Click here and untap my lands and passed. And drew an extra card. That Mox Diamond was correct, but just realized there's a Breya in play and my lands are untapped. And on this turn, my opponent, what play did they? They make some play. I don't remember what it was. Is it a creature? Or a plow, or maybe they took the plow out of my hand. that on that turn, whatever the card was they drew, it exchanged for plow. So it was either a duress or it was a creature that I plowed, something like that. And then on my turn, I drew Dak Fade and treachered the V-click. The treachery had already happened on the V-click, so I get to attack with the click. Breya stays back. I send a couple flyers in. I drew Dak Faden. It must have been, could it have been their commander that I plowed? I don't remember. Anyway, and then I Dak Faden and steal their Soul Ring, at which point my opponent gives up. So telepathy kind of just showing them that they're not going to win right there. So Vandalion Click here is going to be one of the cards that I talk about because it was brought up. But let's take a look at the rest of these games before I start that discussion, and then we'll see. So the second game was against Mad Cow Chicken as well, playing, I can't remember, same deck? Yeah, same deck, Una Queen of the Fae. Leads off with Telepathy, perfect information once again. I play Imperial Seal. Opponent allows that or doesn't have a way to stop it. And then plays Thoughtseize, taking a Dark Confidant out of my hand. So I went and got Soul Ring. Of course, thinking I'd go Soul Ring Confidant here, but my opponent has a mental misstep again, interestingly enough. The card looks a lot better when you have it early. Unfortunately for my opponent, they still miss a land drop and concede. Um, I was saving Brainstorm for a Brainstorm fetch turn, and on the next turn, I believe I Brainstorm instead of fetch land. I can't remember my opponent conceded. Maybe they just conceded right here exactly as the game indicates, but I thought I had like one more turn, and I Brainstormed into like a Wasteland or something, and then they scooped, if I remember right. But at any rate, opponent just misses multiple land drops, has a telepathy instead of a card like uh, Ponder, Preordained, Serum Visions, any of those types of effects would have been much better off. Even Gitaxian Probe would have been better to dig my opponent down to try to find their land, but alas. All right, so the next game is against Kaios 1998, and I've got two games against that opponent as well. I don't remember if they switched decks or not. First one's against Lazav the Multifarious. Um, it may be Farious in multiple ways, but but it's not going to be a very happy opponent in this game. I think we might actually be bugging again. That's kind of frustrating. No, okay, there we go. All right, so okay, whoa. Oh, geez. I thought this was fairly interesting. So my opponent goes land, Mox, Lazav the Multifarious. I go land, Imperial Seal, and I Imperial Seal for Dak Faden. My opponent has a Mox. And I have a Mox Diamond in my hand, but I don't play it. And then on my opponent's turn, they go land, tap out for Rhystic Study. So on my turn, I have to decide, do I want to take a couple of turns and try to protect Dak Faden by plussing him? Or do I want to just go for it and steal my opponent's mana? And I decide that if I feed cards in Rhystic Study and I resolve Dak Faden, my opponent ends up going up 2 cards, but they're down a card for the Rhystic Study, so like they're actually only up 1 card. So it's 1 card to draw 2, so that's plus 1 card. But then when Dak Faden steals their Mox Diamond, the Mox represents 2 cards, so I'm stealing 2 cards from them with the Mox Diamond Theft and adding 1 to my side of the board. So that's a gain of 3 cards. So my opponent is up 1 card, but down 3. So if I go land, Mox Diamond, Dak, steal your Mox, even though I've given my opponent 2 cards, they're actually down. They're at -2, and it provides me with a 2 mana tempo swing, the equivalent of a Soul Ring, um, because my opponent's -1 mana and I'm +1 mana. It may even color screw my opponent. So for all those reasons, I decide I'm going to run into the Rhystic Study, something you almost never see me do, and we end up with this board state here. Now, I didn't count Dak Faden in my card count because my opponent could attack and kill it, but if they couldn't have, then I would have mentally increased the number of cards that play had provided me by 1, because I would have 1 more permanent. So this turn during my upkeep, I have Vampiric Tutor, strip mine them, take a point of damage here, and the next play should be pretty obvious. Crucible, pay for the Rhystic. I paid for the Rhystic on the Vamp as well. Strip mine my opponent's island. And sure enough, by the way, you notice stealing the Mox Diamond kept my opponent off of black. They never had black again for the rest of the game. So all those cards sitting in my opponent's hand, although they're up cards, they for all I know, they're black and completely worthless, and really the net gain for me was more like +4 instead of +2. So really interesting game though. It's just one of those few times where you've got to figure out like don't sometimes you can let your opponent have cards off heuristic study, sometimes it's appropriate. And that was one of those games I thought. All right, so Kaios 1998 jumps into another game with me. And he's running, this time, God Eternal Kefnet. Kefnet. Yeah, an interesting card. Leads off, I get a first turn Skull Clamp to lead off with a Preordain, play a Flooded Strand and pass. I use Flooded Strand here, although I like to save them for Brainstorm, but I have a Colosseum in my hand, so I want to start building up my graveyard. And I end to turn Snapcaster. This is just a draw 2 effect, right? So I'm going to attack for 2 here. Opponent has a Preordain into Opt start. I'm going to go ahead and Trinket Mage, fetching a Crypt, and then clamp the Snapcaster and draw 2 cards. If I find something I can play for 1, I will. If I don't, I clamp the Trinket and pass. I did find Shackles, which is really nice. I'm only 2 blue away from that. Opponent has a Lightning Greaves, though, to be a little cautious. All right, so let's go ahead and get the Commander down. And that represents the draw 4 here. So I'm going to go ahead and attack with Trinket Mage and end my turn. And the reason I don't draw any extra cards there is because I was concerned that if I tapped out, my opponent could steal my commander. Instead, they just Pondify it. Play their commander and give it haste. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. Of course, I don't swing in because I left back exactly 5, thanks to Pondify and the 2 Thopters that I wasn't swinging with. As soon as my opponent draws a card, things could get really crazy. My opponent could get, I don't know exactly what the goal of this is. It certainly doesn't play really nicely with counter spells, which is the biggest problem with it. But it could play very well with like Time Walk effects, big card drawing effects, and things of that nature. So I don't want my opponent to get this ability at all. So on my turn, I play Workshop and run out. This works out really nicely, by the way. So I run out a Thran Dynamo with exactly 1 mana, clamp the Thopter, clamp the other Thopter. This is not correct. That's not what I drew, so I think we're going to bug. Yeah. Anyway, Vandal Blast their Lightning Greaves with just 1 red. What I drew was a copy artifact. I copy artifact the Thran Dynamo here. Yeah, this another bugged game. Very frustrating. I'm not sure why I keep bugging in these replays today. Anyway, well, I had a Jitte and a copy artifact. So I managed to copy artifact the Dynamo, equip the Jitte attack, and then if I remember correctly, there might have been 1 more mana source in there, and I then Vedalken Shackles and Steel Kefnut or something. Anyway, I guess it doesn't matter, but I think the reason we're bugging is because on this turn my opponent conceded. So I think maybe when they concede before, I honestly think that part of the thing that's triggering the bugged games is that there are turns where your opponent just like gets partway through the turn, immediately concedes, and the game ends and can't finish recording. So when you try to replay, it doesn't know what happened at the end. It's a mystery to the replay. But I don't know. Anyway, it was a fun game. And then I started a new one against Dougie Doug, and I've got a very risky keep in some ways, very strong potential, but I have to, I can't get, I have a double blue card and I have no blue sources at all, and then my opponent has Golgari Rot Farm, which means my opponent's actually able to work past a Weathered Wayfarer. Now I don't attack for 1 there because if my opponent goes something like Land Kadama's Reach, I wanted to be able to immediately draw a card. Top decking a Strip Mine is very nice there. I get to actually send in, get some counters on Jitte, and get rid of that Rot Farm. I want to get some Mesmeric Orb down, so this is going to mean that I have to be careful about what cards I select when I as I'm milling myself, because I won't be able to search for everything that I want all the time. I chose not to play Dak Fade in there because I didn't want to mill any extra cards that I might like to search for later. Of course, it could all play into my hands if I drew like a Yawgmoth's Will, but it could also not. So I just decide I'm not going to mess with it. This time I go ahead and use the Tithe trick to go get a Ancient Tomb with my Weathered Wayfarer, and then run out a Tezzeret and Tez for 3 right here before it gets milled. Crucible Worlds now, every time I mill a land, it's good for me, but of course I've got Strip Mine already to go in the graveyard. So with 4 counters on Jitsi, I'm not worried about Marin. If my opponent were to have played land Marin there, I just immediately kill it with Jitte. All right, so X is 0 for a Mox Opal. Play Narset. DAC my opponent, so they draw 1, discard 2. I then replay Strip Mine, attack with Weathered Wayfarer, pump Jitte after they block, play a Grim Monolith, pass. I've got 5 counters on a Jitte now, and my opponent wisely concedes at this point. If they don't concede here, I impulsed, by the way, with Narset and reveal the Vindicate to my opponent. So if they don't concede here, I mean, it's clearly over. If my opponent were to, say, reanimate a Woodfall Primus, they could kill something. I'm not exactly sure what they would target. It barely matters at this point, but perhaps they would kill, I don't know. The smartest thing they could kill is probably Narset, actually. No, they'd have to kill Crucible Worlds. If they reanimated time, they would have to kill Crucible, or else they're going to get strip mined to death. And then on my turn to just plow that thing off the board. Deck fading them with Narset running, so they go +1, -2 cards, so they discard a card again. Narset impulses, I vindicate their swamp, and I sit on mana drain. Pretty much over. Um, with Tezzeret here, in case if I draw a land, I'll just Tez for 0 and go get Mox Diamond. If I don't draw, oh no, Mox Diamond is gone. But in that case, I just plus Tezzeret and start probably casting my commander is most likely it. I mean, it's definitely over. So moving on to the next game, I've got Olai Lama. And Olai is playing Zakama Primal Cruelty Calamity. I've got a I've got a risky keep, but it had Plow and Vandal Blast and a way to cast both, and I decided to keep it on the strength of that. My opponent leads off with a Soul Ring a turn later, which kind of rewards me. But I've got Copy Artifact, and I'm kind of hurting for mana, so I decided I'm going to leave them with it, let them do their worst, and their worst is terrible for them. Adventurer's Impulse, they look at 3 cards and find no lands. I immediately strip mine, Vandal Blast them, and I can now play an Ocean Thief. If my opponent plays with planes, and then if my opponent hadn't conceded here, then the play is almost certainly. So I probably want to get Kaya down, but Notion Thief DAC is just gross. So at the end of their turn, I'm gonna play a Notion Thief off the Cavern of Souls, and then on my turn play DAC, target them. They will draw no cards, discard 2, and I will draw 2 cards. Completely insane. It's basically Kaya's effect, except twice as powerful. And then I get to follow it up with Kaya the turn after that and continue to hit him with it. So barring a plow on the Notion Thief in response or something, that game was 100% over. Um, and since my opponent didn't have land in their top 5, which was terrible, unfortunately for them, so they lost. I guess they kept it because they had the Soul Ring, and I don't blame them. But well, they had 1 land in their top 5. I should say they had that Plains, but missing it on the dig was pretty bad for them. And then here is an incredibly epic game. This is what the video is really for. This is where I stopped and said, okay, I have to play a video. I'm playing against God of Iroas, God of Victory. So it's an aggressive commander. And I have got the kind of hand that's very aggressive against blue, but not so great necessarily against aggro. But I do get an early Confidant down, and it seems to be sticking, so this is good. My opponent's got some haste mentor creature. I would definitely block there and actually make the trade against aggro because my hand is very strong and I could afford to do so. Instead, I go get myself a mana crypt, play top, and use it to try to take less damage from my Confidant next turn. I figured they'd play their commander here and attack in, and I'd take 4. Instead, they run out Daru Warchief and smash in for 6. That's painful. Plus Mentor makes it 7. I guess it would have been 5 in the previous turn. Anyway, Confidant gets me the Mana Vault that I put on top. I lose a flip. I'm now down to 17. This is some bad news bears right here. So I'm going to Spellseeker into a Mystical Tutor and pass. I could have used top, I suppose, to grab the workshop and sneak out the vault while I was at it, but I decided not to. Anyway, opponent plays Aroas, and now their creatures have haste, menace. So I have to double block. I can't block in a way that would suit my life total. So I double block in a way that ensures I don't kill anything. And end step, I go ahead and mystical, and then I do not mana confluence. I win a flip here, and then have to deluge for 4. So the reason I didn't kill their commander is because I wanted to deluge for 4 right off the board. Anything my opponent plays here is getting mana drained. I need the mana. I'm in big trouble. I'm at 6 now. And I lose a flip. And my opponent, if they had just simply bolted me on their turn, would have won this game. But instead they waited till I untapped and gave me my blue mana. That's a tip, pro tip. If you know you're going to play the instant, play it when your opponent's tapped out. Playing it as an instant is not always the smart thing to do. Anyway, I'm sure all my viewers already know that though. But anyway, so I have to do this. I'm going to pause. I have to do this really rough thing. And that rough thing is realizing that I need to play my commander next turn, well, as soon as possible. I use the extra mana I have to activate Sensei's Divining Top, and I see a Steam Vents, which will let me get my commander down. So I use the top to get Steam Vents onto the board tapped, and then because I'm now at, well, 3, I have to Mind Twist my opponent in case they have burn, excuse me, and or a haste creature, and that takes me down to 2. Um, and then for my opponent's turn, but it leaves me with this mana in play and this here and a Sensei's Divining Top on top of my library. For my opponent's turn, they just draw and do nothing. They can't play their commander because it costs 6, and presumably don't have one more bolt there. I actually got to play survive using forbid on that particular lightning bolt. Anyway, so the entire game comes down to a coin flip, and as you can see, heads, I won the flip. So I get to continue with my turn. And notice I'm at 2, and my commander is going to cost me a life here and drop me down to exactly 1. I made one small mistake here. I should have played Sensei's Divining Top first, and the reason was my opponent drew Wear Tear. Crud. All right, well, I'm going to sack Breya and gain 5 life anyway, which was what I needed to do. I do have a mana vault ready to go, but if I'd have played the top, then I could have, the way that I would have played that turn would have been slightly altered. But I got the mana crypt off the board, which is very important. I now get to replay Breya. My opponent's play is Helm of the Host, which it's a 5 mana to equip, but at the beginning of combat, you clone whatever it's equipped to, and the clone is not a legend, so you can actually do it with your commanders. Anyway, on my turn, I go ahead and just replay Breya and gain 5 more life, and now I'm out of the danger zone, I feel like. Almost. There's one card that my opponent could have killed me with right there that comes to mind immediately. Do you know what it was? Price of Progress would have killed me. I would have taken 10 exactly. Fortunately, my opponent does not draw Price of Progress. They draw a mountain. And from here on out, I'm going to do my best to stay out of the kill zone. And the first thing I'm going to do, though, is put myself right back in it because I'm greedy. I'm trying to end the game as fast as I can rather than play it defensively. And this is foolish, but it's fun. So I clone their Helm of the Host and smash. My opponent then plays Sword of the Animist. I go ahead and Dak Fade and steal that. Equip. I get another clone of Breya. I smash in, and the game is over. I get to even grab an island for my troubles, because why not? So if I would have been playing in a tournament, I certainly would not have made the tap your Ancient Tomb and tap out when you're at 10 life play just for the giggles of it, of equipping the helm. I would have waited a turn. I would have just attacked in and then sacked my Thopters to gain some life and go up to 15, just to stay out of Price of Progress range. But I had a good time with this. Such a cool game that I actually managed to, I got down to Mana Crypt at 2 life, cast Breya, win the flip, and then cast Breya off a Mana Confluence, dropping to 1, and managed to crawl from that position to this totally dominant triple Breya beatdown position in 2 turns later. I thought that was super cool. I hope you enjoyed that game, that was the one that I said, oh man, I've got to take a time out and make a video with this. And then again, the deck list and the discussion that I want to have. So people were asking about a couple of different cards. My son's playing video games. Um, he's pretty excited because he's found the boss. Okay, so I have so a couple of things. First of all, I'll preface by saying these are my thoughts or my feelings on the matter. A certain amount of experience talking, but I do not believe that I am infallible. In fact, I'm not even close to that. So if I'm wrong about this stuff, I'm wrong about this stuff. But that's why we're having the conversation. Anyway, one of the things that I was asked about was why Kaya, which is interesting to me. It's slightly confusing to me in some ways. Why Kaya? Kaya's totally insane to me. And perhaps that's not enough of a reason to run it. In other words, there are a lot of good cards, and being a good card is not enough of a reason to play a card. Um, what you need is good cards that actually advance the plot. So you want to, like, for example, if your goal is to winter or block somebody, then you don't need to play and probably don't generally want to play cards like Thoughtseize, unless the environment is just so combo centric that you have to. Because once you have your opponent or blocked, you don't care a whit for what's in their hand. You know, they could have 7 cards in hand. You draw a Thoughtseize and you go, whatever, they just drew and discarded last turn. What am I going to do with Thoughtseize, right? I don't care. Um, so does Kaya advance the plot? I feel like it does. There's a 2-card combo that actually just wins most of the time. That 2-card combo is Kaya plus Forbid. These 2 cards together, if you get your opponent empty-handed and you're drawing 2 cards per turn, they're not going to recover. Kaya will get you 2 extra cards before you have to reset it. And then if your opponent sandbags a card, trying to work around Forbid. So if you do the math, like let's say you Kaya the last card out of their you play Kaya and take the last card out of their hand. You have a Forbid in your hand, um, and a card, presumably. So you each, or let's just say you have just the Forbid, so you don't really have the lock yet, right? But they have like 1 turn to do something. Otherwise, you're going to start forbidding with buyback. On the next turn, you draw a card, and then you Kaya them, take the card in their hand out of their hand, draw another card. So you've got 3 cards and a forbid. They get to draw a card on your next turn. You draw a card. You have 4 cards. Kaya's at 0. You 0 it and exile itself, and pass to the turn. You now have got a forbid with 4 cards in your hand. They've got 1 card in their hand. They draw for the turn. They have 2 cards in their hand. They make a play. You forbid with buyback. You forbid with buyback again. If they don't make a play, Kaya pops back out, and you immediately draw a card. You draw to 5. You Kaya draw to 6. Take them down to 1 card in hand. There's no way to get out of that. Like once that gets going, there's a little window in the beginning where you've got forbidden 1 card, for example, and they can get out of it, or maybe they, like in the example I gave, they have cards that they can respond with. At a certain point, though, it becomes unbreakable and outside of uncounterable cards. I mean, this is Magic the Gathering, right? You can always come up with a scenario to get out of it, but it's what I would call a soft lock. And these 2 cards will lock the game out. Meanwhile, what else does Kaya do? So, of course, if you get something like Necropotence going, you don't really care about the extra cards that much. It's just a discard effect. It's a second Disrupting Scepter along the lines of Sword of Feast and Famine, because Forbid, Sword, and basically anything else is soft lock as well. Anything that draws cards is a soft lock. And so really that kind of scenario that you're trying to set up um, is definitely something that this deck tries to do. It tries to do it with Sword of Feast and Famine. It tries to do it with Kaya. It tries to do it with um, the Dak Faden Notion Thief, Cephalid Colosseum, Dak Faden, or Narset Dak Faden, or Cephalid Colosseum. So any of those like combos, right? Notion Thief, Cephalid Colosseum, whatever. The idea is to create that kind of soft lock scenario where your opponent just never gets more than one card per turn. And of course, you try to do it with Mind Twist as well, just because you can twist your opponent down to no cards in hand, and then have, for each counterspell, it's now essentially a time walk, because if they attempt to make a play and you have X number of counters, they need X number of plays in order to finally get around all those counters in your hand, and assuming you have enough mana to play them. And that's why Mind Twist so often is a win. So the goal is to get your opponent empty-handed, and then have more counters than they have turns. But it's not the only goal, right? The other goal, the reverse goal, is the winter orb goal, where you nullify all their cards, effectively mind twisting them forever. It's like a mind twist every turn because they don't get to play anything, uh, until you defeat the opponent. You want to get them down to one spell per turn because they don't have any mana, and then you just need one counter spell every turn to lock them out. And again, Winter Orb, Kaya, Forbid is also a lock in that sense, because they can't even sandbag cards. There's just no out, right? Okay, so that's one of the things that Kaya does. The other thing Kaya does is it zeroes and it blinks, and that is occasionally, not always, but occasionally pretty darn good. It blinks itself, of course, that's mediocre. I really wish, the one thing that I wish the card did was that when you use the zero ability, you could blink a creature and Kaya rather than or, but maybe that's asking for too much. However, I have used Kaya to blink Spellseeker, which is almost unbeatable in itself. Blinking a Spellseeker is like having a zero demonic tutor over and over, because the first thing you blink it for is like mana drain, and then the second thing you do is you blink it for Mind Twist, and then you've got the Kaya situation set up. You can blink it again and go get Merchant Scroll, and then you can Merchant Scroll and go get Forbid, and now you've got empty-handed opponent, Mind Twist, a mana drain to fuel it if they try to do anything about it, and then you've got the Forbid lock. Game's over, right? So there's that. Um, I've blinked Snapcaster before in order to get a second Swords to Plowshares or something along those lines. That's pretty nice. I've also done stuff like blink your Notion Thief and then cast Toxic Deluge, clear the board out, and just not lose my creature, which is pretty cool. I have never blinked a Breya, but theoretically that would be useful if you, for example, have Breya, Soul Ring, Gilded Lotus, and you've already sacked your flyers. You could sack Breya and a Soul Ring to kill something, or if you have Kaya, you can just blink Breya and then collect two creatures later and potentially kill something. It's the reason I typically don't do it is because it doesn't blink immediately, so a lot of times you're blinking Breya out if in that scenario, and then they're just attacking Kaya. Um, but it is at least something of an option. The other thing that I've done with Kaya, though, is it returns the creature to its owner's control. So I've actually blinked a Treachery off from one of my creatures, which is pretty nice. So the ability is like, it's not great, right? But it's not garbage either. And then lastly, in Magic Online, um, it's a little bit. There's one other thing about Kaya. So Kaya's blink ability can actually keep a commander that has an activation cost from activating, and it can basically suppress an opponent's commander for a long time. There are commanders who, for example, I think it's Yisan, the Wandering Bard, who you keep that thing blinked out for 2 life per turn. You basically pithing needled their commander. Like the fact that their commander has an activation cost, it just they never get to use it, so they have to play their entire deck without the commander as long as Kai is alive, and that's extremely good quite often. There are other commanders that are like that, um, but also, and then this last one is kind of one to be mindful of. It's not great. I don't feel happy about saying it, but it is something that happens sometimes. Because of the way that the interface really, really sucks when it comes to commanders. If you blink somebody's commander, quite often it goes directly to the command zone because because the game doesn't, you target it with the Kaya, and what should happen is the game should ask you, would you like to put it in the command? Would you like to put it in the command zone instead? And you click yes or no or whatever. Would you like to put it in the command zone? And you just be like, no, I don't want to put it in the command zone. And then it gets exiled to Kaya's ability. That's what should happen. But what actually happens is um, you have to pre-stop before the effect hits. You have to right click on your commander and say, I want you to go to exile, not the command zone. Then let Kaya resolve. But by then, a lot of times like it's too late because you have to actually do it before the Kaya effect sticks. And a lot of times people aren't thinking about that. So that it blinks out and then there's no chance to actually say to do what you want. And it's Magic Online, right? So a lot of times Kaya comes down and it's just zero kill their commander. You blink it and it goes directly to the command zone. You're like, this is cheesy and I'm not like, this isn't the reason to play it, but it's one of those irritating things. And what I kind of hope is that, and this might be completely silly, and at this point in the game it probably is, but my hope is that enough people get annoyed by that happening to them that they complain, and maybe Wizards will fix it because I'd really like them to patch the game so that when the commander leaves play, it asks you, would you like to put it in the command zone? And you say yes or no. And then if you say no, it just does the thing that it's supposed to do. Like if it's a exile or tuck it into the library or whatever, right? That's what I'd like to see happen. And there's some part of me that hopes that I can annoy enough people into complaining to make it happen, but I find it unlikely. As far as the life loss ability goes, because it's not direct damage, you can't kill other planeswalkers with it. It's almost like that ability doesn't even exist on the card. The the one and only time I ever used that, I'd necroed down to one, and Kaya was actually I could -2. My opponent had no cards in hand, so I could -2 and draw one card, or I could take two of their life and convert it into two cards. So that's what I was doing long enough to survive. But that's a pretty niche situation, not a reason to play it. Now, do I think that this is the best card in 4 and it should never be cut? I don't. I could see removing this card for something else. And if you feel like doing that, then, remove away. But that's the reason for it being in the deck. Um, as far as I think trying to bring up, there was something else that I had been asked about. It was either a why am I not or question or why am I question, and I don't recall. So I'm going to take a look at the video here. What was this? Newsbusters. All right. Let me bring up YouTube and go to my channel and go to videos and see if I can pause it before it starts talking. And let's see, there were a couple other questions. Yeah, so this was the Kaya question from Ida Sherman. So that's my response to that. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the correct response, but I did want to address it. Oh yeah, Cosmo Killa had asked, what's my opinion on Vendilion Click in general? Is it too low toughness for what it does? That's not really the issue. The example I gave of Thoughtseize being bad a lot of times is exactly what Vendilion Click is a lot of times. It's just one of those cards that it is. Look, V-Click is super cool if you have like a Notion Thief in play, and it's pretty acceptable if you have a Narset in play. Um, although at that point, wouldn't you at 3 mana, if that's like what you're thinking, like okay, well I've got Notion Thief or Narset, the first thing you should be thinking is, well, wouldn't I be happier if I had a Time Twister in my hand? And yeah, the answer is yes, obviously, right? So it's not really even good at doing that. We don't need flyers to carry swords. We have Breya, so that's kind of useless. Basically, we can't play Caracas. If we could, then V-Click might be a lot more interesting because we could V-Click and Caracas it back and have like an infinite blocker. Basically, it's a worse version of True Name Nemesis most of the time. So if it's carrying equipment that you want, the card you want is True Name Nemesis. If that's the only thing, if that's why we're putting it in the deck, we want True Name. If the card is there for a combo with Notion Thief, we want Time Twister. And if the card is there to disrupt our opponent, well, I mean, there's so many cards that'll do that so much better, but the most obvious one is Thoughtseize at 1 mana, and permanently not giving an opponent a replacement card. But certainly there are others, like, for example, Hymn to Torok, right? I mean, we can play Hymn to Torok in this deck. So It just not. It just isn't a card that particularly does anything special, and what it does is worse than everything else. It's also got a competitor coming in the next set, and I'll mention that at the very end. Any other um, comments that I need to address? I don't think so. There is a deck list, and I'll continue to update it as I go. Um, Talking about Narset. Okay, so what was the other card that I wanted to talk about? There's a new card coming in the next set, and I think, can I find a spoiler for it? And I want to bring that up. I would have preferred that I had this already to go for you, but well, let's see. MTG spoiler. I think it's Modern Horizons. Yeah. Okay, this is the one I want. Force of Negation. Look at this lovely thing here. This is going to be a 100% every blue deck. Always play it. This card goes in every blue deck and never comes out. So if you get a hold of one, be happy. Force of Negation. This is a force of will that you can only play on your opponent's turn, and it's only for a negate effect. So it counters non-creature spells, and you can only play it on your opponent's turn as a force of will. But you can play it as a regular negate for one extra blue. So one blue, blue, blue. If it's not your turn, you may use force of will mechanic. Counter target non-creature spell. If the spell's countered that way, exile it instead of putting it in the owner's graveyard, which is another nice perk of this card. This card actually looks extremely good for Legacy to deal with freaking Life from the Loam. I'm pumped about that. Um, this is actually going to be phenomenal for that. But meanwhile, the fact that this card is effectively a force of will for almost all the things that you care about means you put it in all your blue decks. You don't take it out. You always play force of will. You always play this card in Commander, one each. Just get one, put it in all your blue decks, and never think twice about it. This card is amazing. The fact that it exiles in Commander is rarely meaningful, but occasionally, because there are cards like this, and there are other cards that might actually care about that card. So I'm very excited. We're only 20 cards in, and already the next set's going to have an influence. And what gets cut for that? I don't know. Maybe it will be the Kai. I don't think so, but it could be. It could be. The thing I don't like here is that I'm very 4 mana heavy right now, and I'd love to get, a 1 and a 3 or a couple of 2s or something like that. But so it goes. The other thing I don't like about the deck right now, for if you're interested, is that there's only one basic island, and I'd very much like two, because I feel like with just exactly one, you can draw it and then have somebody play like a Path to Exile effect, or a Ghost Quarter effect, and you don't have a second one to put into play, and that's a bummer. But also having a second one is really good for Vedalken Shackles. However, despite those two reasons for wanting a second island, it is not better than Cephalid Colosseum in this deck. This card is actually not. Because of Narset, this card is not coming out. Because this is such an easy inclusion, and this is such a devastating combo, there's no way that Colosseum is ever going to come out of this deck again that I can see. So if we're going to get another island in here, it'd have to be like a 30-second land, and, well, already struggling for cards, but that's it. So that's where I'm at as far as deck construction goes, thought processes, and my responses that I wanted to share. But I'm interested in your opinion as well, your opinion of my opinion, and what you think. And that's it. I thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the Dance with Death in that last game, and I'll see you next time.